Coming up on this episode of the Mario Rosenstock podcast.
We have taken the global carbon cycle and blown it to pieces. We've injected hundreds of millions of years of carbon from deep history into a few decades. And it is a catastrophic decision. And that's why I keep doing what I do, Mario, is because we need to keep talking about this. Because I keep hearing people saying, oh, it's very expensive to change. I like the old diesel, right? And I'm not giving up my beefsteaks. Well, I'm saying you can accept modest losses and trade-offs, or we lose everything. Every crumb of the last 10,000 years of human development is on the line in the next 20 to 30 years.
When it comes to the climate crisis, John Gibbons certainly does not mince his words. He's one of Ireland's best known and most vocal environmental campaigners, consistently highlighting the issue and the emergency we're in for well over 20 years. John has appeared pretty regularly on this podcast, and he does a weekly slot on Matt Cooper's Last Word programme also every week. He's just published a book called The Lie of the Land, a game plan for Ireland in the climate crisis, and he has joined me here in the GoLoud studio to tell me about it. We talk about how we have gotten into the situation we're in, and he deals with some of the climate-sceptic arguments that are floating around quite a lot at the moment. But he's not just banging the drum about the problem. He's got some very clear solutions, which he shares too, and he's very optimistic that it's not at all too late to put them into action. And he reveals a very interesting little story about a pretty serious run-in he had with a certain very, very well-known national broadcaster.
He laid into me, and who do you think you are, etc. He was giving me the big man job, right? And this altercation, if I can call it that, went on for a solid hour. It ended at 2 minutes to 10 because he had to do his radio show at 10 o'clock. And I actually spoke to a colleague of his who said that he was in the room, and he said we were all going, oh my God, it was literally murder on the dance floor. But I mean, you go back 20 or 30 years ago and Bill Gates was considered to be another monstrous oligarch. The only difference is he was hurt enough by being hated that he actually went and spent some money to clean his reputation. What are the current oligarchs doing? It's just burn it all to the ground. And they burp constantly. The only way they can exit the methane is to burp it out. I've often had the idea, Mario, that we should fit little lighters to them so we could flare off the methane. And out in the countryside, you drive along in the night and it would look like there's a field full of dragons with these flames going out.
My full chat with the ever-passionate and always interesting and compelling John Gibbons coming up in just a couple of minutes' time. But as you can imagine, John attracts a lot of attention with his very vocal views. And so as soon as I put out the word that he was going to join me here on the podcast, the Mario Rosenstock podcast hotline started hopping. You've reached the Mario Rosenstock podcast voicemail. Please leave your message for today's guest, John Gibbons, on the voicemail.
Hi John, Matt Cooper here. I love our regular chats on The Last Word. I wonder on the QT if you could do a regular bit on Paths to Power when Ivan's away. I'll give you the dates then.
Matt, what's going on?
Oh, Ivan, how are you?
I heard it all, Matt.
Oh.
And if you think I'm having that environmental snowflake on the show, you have another thing coming. I'm going to give you an awful hard belt to this microphone cable.
Really? Harder than the last time?
Much harder.
Oh.
This is Michael O'Leary. I've been listening to John Gibbons' uninterrupted love-ins on The Last Word for far too long now. When is there going to be a bit of balance? If John has his way, he'd remove the engines from every single airplane across the globe and use the aircraft body to grow courgettes and bloody hemp. How do you think Billy from Ballymun and Mary from Mullingar are going to go on their pathetic little package holiday to Torremolinos then? They'd string John up by one of his ghoulies in their beloved wind turbines. Within minutes. Good luck. This is Michael Healy-Ray. Now, easy knowing John is living in the big smoke and can saunter around the city by foot or bus or train to get wherever he has to go to. What about those of us who live in the countryside and run modest plant hire companies? I have to put diesel in my car to get to the shops to do a few messages. And I also have to put a small shop into the 3 bulldozers, 2 excavators, 6 JCBs, 4 tipper trucks and 3 telehandlers that I need to do a little bit of work around the parish for the neighbours and the like. Can you please spare the thought for us poor country folk?
and exclusive new comedy every week on the Mario Rosenstock podcast. And of course, you can get in touch with me directly about anything. MarioRosenstock@gmail.com. I read them all. You can talk to me about the podcast. Do you like it? Do you have some constructive criticisms? Which guests would you like to see? We've had a lot of requests recently for a certain very famous, shall we say, comic writer. We're looking into that and considering asking him if he would like to be on the podcast. I'm sure you might be able to guess who it is. If you would like to suggest ideas for sketches, favourite characters that I haven't done that you'd like to see me do. And I would like to thank not only you, of course, the most important element of this podcast, and I would urge you, tell one other person if you can to listen to this podcast, but I would also like to thank my fantastic sponsor, deluxebathrooms.ie. Their autumn super sale is right on now. Get up to 70% off Europe's biggest bathroom brands. Transform your bathroom for less. Why not visit their amazing showrooms and take the first step towards designing a bathroom you'll never want to leave? They're located at Dundalk Retail Park and Eastgate Retail Park, Little Island, Cork. They say, make your dream bathroom a reality with Deluxe Bathrooms. You'll find many fantastic offers across their extensive range of premium bathroom products and exclusive tiles. They have a huge selection of bathroom and kitchen tiles from the world's leading tile manufacturers in Spain and Italy. So go get it. The 70% off Europe's biggest bathroom brands at their autumn super sale ends coming to the end of September. I think it's the last week in September it ends. And my continuing thanks to deluxebathrooms.ie for getting involved with the Mario Rosenstock podcast. To Martin and all the gang, thank you. Okay, time to meet John Gibbons. He's here to tell me all about his new book, The Lie of the Land, which is a bit of a play on words, surely, isn't it, John?
Yeah, I suppose we can take it at face value. And The Lie of the Land is, the state of play. Yeah. Where are we? How do we get here? Where are we going? That's at the simplest level. And obviously within that, I think a lot of the focus in the book is on the lies and deception that have surrounded a lot of the story, particularly in where the lobbyists and sectoral interests have stymied climate action in Ireland pretty much at every turn. And we've seen that very, very strongly, of course, in the industrial livestock sector. So I think some of that, and again, I go into it in great detail and name names really, and I'm quite specific about the kind of misinformation. And I'm talking about all over the place. It's not just at a public level. It's attacking scientists. It's demonizing environmental defenders. It's even spreading propaganda into our schools all the way to primary school level. So I go into that in some detail. So it's a fairly concerted attempt at misrepresenting the reality in particular of agriculture in Ireland, downplaying the downsides and hyping up the benefits.
Okay, so you're concentrating on Ireland, but of course it's a worldwide issue, and that's what you and I have mainly talked about over the years. Just tangentially to that point, I mean, you talked about the misinformation and the rise of misinformation, in fact, over the last maybe 6-10 years. How is the battle of ideas going, John, worldwide? I mean, I've talked to you for nearly 10 years now about this. How is this battle of ideas faring? I mean, I would have thought that maybe around, let's say 2017, 2018, the battle of ideas was going well enough in terms of your story, your depiction of the way things are happening, which is based in fact, was getting out there. And then, of course, we had this seismic shift on the other side of the Atlantic, and in fact, bolstered by other sort of illiberal regimes around the world as well. The fashionable illiberal regimes. Yeah,
it's almost like, as you say, there was that tide was building in the late teens, and I think the tide sort of hit its zenith in 2019. Mario, you'll remember the children's strike movement right across the world. We had tens of thousands of people, including my kids, on the streets of Dublin, on the streets of Cork, and around the world there were millions. It was one of the biggest public strike movements ever seen. So that was 2019. And I suppose that turned out to be the crest of a breaking wave. I think the momentum for that, we saw it, for example, that later that year, the Oireachtas declared climate and biodiversity emergency in May 2019, although we might be warned that the actual chambers were empty. I think there were 6 people in the chamber when that monumental announcement was made, which suggested to those of us who are a little more cynical that it was very much about kind of jumping on the bandwagon rather than that the members of the Oireachtas were actually serious about this. Anyway, we saw, for example, Mario, late in 2019, RTE did this thing called the Climate Week, where they went, gung-ho, all guns blazing. So for folks like me, this seemed like this is the brave new world where we were finally getting a reaction to the climate crisis commensurate with the crisis. I remember being very animated and very excited about this, also a little bit concerned that it might turn out to be another 9-day wonder, which of course is exactly what happened. I think we were super unfortunate that February, March 2020, the COVID pandemic, well, first of all, it shut down the public strike movement, and it took all the air out of that movement. So the ability to mobilise, to apply street pressure, etc., that all failed. I think COVID, I know we're not here to talk about COVID, but it is an important detour. Yeah. COVID also was a perfect breeding ground for disinformation.
I was just about to jump in there. Yeah, if you don't, you can carry on with this. But I just wrote down there, COVID was the human beings in large urban areas watching the news, staying at home, being in COVID, a kind of a thing happened that an anti-science basically fermented among people, or the opportunity for people who were anti-science to vent took hold. So, vaccines bad. Look what they said about masks. Haha, I told you. The scientists are rubbish. And then, therefore, that led people to be able to go, well, if those science are rubbish, don't listen to those stupid climate scientists either. Isn't that right? I
think that's right. It created a wedge because COVID presented us with medical uncertainty. The experts had to stand up and say, we don't know. Now, that is a very honest thing to say. And when you don't know something, you should always say it. But of course, as soon as you say it, the naysayers jump up and down and say, there, I told you, these so-called experts know nothing. You can know lots, but also admit the bits you don't know. And there's a world of difference between knowing lots and knowing nothing. So I think that on vaccine uncertainty, and there was genuine uncertainty because scientists were trying to figure out even the methods of transmission, how best to deal with it, etc. And into that wedge. And I will say, Mario, as well, we can talk about disinformation as if it's just in the ether. Let's bear in mind that we know that the state of Russia, which of course is a petrostate, they flooded huge investment into the 2016 US election with great results from their point of view. Facebook ads booked in rubles, for goodness sakes. We know that the state of Russia has been interested in destabilizing the Western world, knowing that it can't defeat it militarily. It was extremely interested in spreading as much discord as possible, and COVID presented a golden opportunity. And again, remember, there's a confluence of interests here. The two things that they wanted to do: number one, weaken the West, and number two, protect their fossil fuel interests, and they coincided perfectly. So a lot, not all, by the way, there were plenty of other bad actors in this, and I'm not just singling out Russia for no reason, but certainly they were there as a state actor pumping money into this. So people kind of wonder, well, every time I went online, every time I opened YouTube, there are all these ads, there are all this stuff that was paid for. A lot of that stuff was paid for, and they bump up the algorithms, they pump it out. And by the way, if I were their marketing communications manager, I would say that whatever they spent on it was a bargain. The fossil fuels are riding high. Fascists are installed, Russia-friendly fascists are installed in Washington. It has been a tremendous return on investment, probably beyond their wildest dreams.
So would you say then, overall, the battle of ideas has taken a turn for the worst?
Without a doubt.
How does that affect what you do, what you think? You've always been a person who has, by definition of what you do, every time I've talked to you, we've joked about it, how negative you are and how negative you have to be. Now, you're not a negative person at all, but it's just that, I'm sorry, Mario, I bring you more bad news. It's getting worse. This was always you, and we would laugh about that. But if you felt like that at this time in 2019, how do you feel now?
Yeah, it's difficult to remain optimistic, and I think the book, for example, the review in the Irish Times of the weekend made the point that I wasn't leaving people with a sense of hopefulness. There has been a tendency in climate publishing to sort of stick on a last chapter where you've just described the hellish landscape, and then you say, but it'll be grand. Right? And people kind of leave the book or the movie going, oh, well, thank goodness, right? And I think that's part of the dishonesty of the discourse around climate change, the inability to look directly into the flame and say, we're in a really bad way here. But to your point, we're objectively significantly worse off now globally than we were then. I mean, let's even take what's happened in the last 6 to 7 months in America. I mean, America has been the powerhouse of climate science. I mean, the very satellites over our head that are monitoring the weather, that the satellites that are monitoring CO2 levels, they're being decommissioned as we speak. We have a defunding and an attack on science, Mario, the like of which we haven't seen since Lyshenkoism in Soviet-era Russia back in the 50s and 60s. And to be honest with you, this has a very Stalin vibe, this whole current era. It really does. It's Stalin redux.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean, and it's happening, the way it's a slow-moving kind of coup. It's one of those things that it's happening gradually. And then if you go, well, what did we have 2 years ago compared to what we have now? I mean, everybody, for example, all the scientists getting fired and all that sort of stuff and commissioned.
And, shutting down dissent, it's really a scary time. And of course, also, we're seeing the active defunding of renewable energy. And this is like costing individual states. Texas, for example, right? The great, Republican state of Texas is one of the world's great centers of wind energy, right? Now, wouldn't you want to be a crazy person to attack wind energy in a Republican state? But that's what he's doing. He's defunding it. He's drawing money away from it. They're taking incentives away from renewable energy, which, need certain support to get off the ground. And they're funneling it instead back into fossil fuels, like, mandates to reopen, coal plants that were defunct and unprofitable years ago. So what we're looking at here, Mario, is pure, deep ideology. And people kind of say, well, why? Why does Trump care about this? I mean, the figure that I saw was that the fossil fuel industry in the US pumped over $450 million into the Republican campaign in the 2024 election cycle. So that wasn't just all Trump. That was also buying Republican senators. And it was tremendously successful. And I would like to say, by the way, that this is only happening on that side of the aisle. But in fact, you have Democratic senators who are also compromised by fossil fuel money. And again, I mean, what a bargain. $500 million to destroy the world's greatest democracy and to forestall the renewable energy transition. And the strange thing is, of course, what's really happened here is that America, having led the world in every sense, politically, economically, soft power, hard power, you name it, for 70 years. I mean, in the last 7 months, we've had a change of global leadership. America is now effectively fallen behind China. And I suspect, given the ideological collapse, the destruction of science, the destruction of learning, that we can expect America to continue to wither away. It'll be this sort of powerful entity with a massive army. But, the Roman Empire in its latter days had a massive army, but it was basically circling the drain. And that's what we see now in America. Once you've destroyed your intellectual basis, once you've destroyed science and belief in science, any society that does that is the equivalent of ripping your own eyes out. It's only a matter of time before those societies fail. Yeah. So, by the way, I say this without an iota of glee. Because
I know.
None at all.
I know. It's so funny when you mention Climate Week there in RT, because that's not happening anymore.
No.
This sort of stuff isn't happening anymore. And it just reminds me of the fickleness of media and how back then it was climate, it was the cool thing to do. It was almost in tandem with Me Too. It was almost like the Me Too movement and climate. We're all, we're going to tag along with this for a while. And now it's not fashionable at the moment.
It's just the tide has gone out. And, for example, in the rounds of publicity around the book, nobody in RT, not one RT station or program is interested in having a discussion like this. Not one, Mario.
So, sorry, but you were able to have it with Matt.
Of course, and
but RTE wouldn't have you.
Not one, Sean Moncrief, and many other media outlets. So I've been pretty much everywhere with this.
Except RTE.
Except RTE. It's a strange one. And I actually had a call.
Did Pat Kenny have you?
Probably not, because I'm afraid the story, you obviously haven't got to that section yet, but probably I don't think Pat and myself are going to be sharing a studio again, I'm afraid. But no, I mean, look, that's their business. But I said I got a call this morning from a senior producer in a part of RTE, kind of apologetic about the whole thing, and just saying, it's nothing personal, John, it's gone off the radar in here. Sorry, kid.
But that's what I'm saying.
It's exactly your point.
What's gone off the radar?
It's just
the
not
end of the world.
Yeah, it's just not. No, we're worried about Gaza. And by the way, I'm worried about Gaza. We all are worried about Gaza. We're worried about Ukraine.
Sorry, but that's another thing that clashes with something else that somebody on my podcast said recently. They said, whatever you do now when you go into the studio, don't mention Gaza, please.
Really?
Yeah. So for God's sake.
I mean, look, these things are connected. And let's take the great heroine of the climate march movement, Greta Thunberg, right? She's suddenly become a pariah figure now because she has identified and allied herself with the movement to attempt to end the genocide in Gaza. So
I want to come to Ireland in a minute, which is the subject of your book. But this summer, I think this summer, if I'm right in saying, has been recorded as the hottest summer on record, I think.
Yeah, that's correct. Certainly in Europe, Europe has had its hottest summer. Ireland has had its hottest summer. Europe actually might be the second hottest. We know, for example, we had 1 million hectares of land destroyed across Europe, which, to translate that into something understandable, the Phoenix Park is 700 hectares. So imagine 1,200 Phoenix Parks up in flames. So just for context. Yeah. That's just in Europe, by the way. And again, we've talked about this before. The thing that people don't quite seem to grasp about the climate issue is that we're priming the pump every single year. And the carbon that we emitted last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, is still swirling above our heads, and we're breathing it right now. And this is the critical thing that's happened is, of course, that we've changed the fundamental chemistry of the atmosphere. The only species, certainly in 1 billion years, to actually re-engineer the chemistry of an entire planet. If you take from say 1900 to today, which is 125 years, in that time, the chemical composition, the amount of carbon dioxide in the global atmosphere has gone up by 50%. The amount of methane in the atmosphere globally has gone up by 200%. And the problem with these gases is that they're powerful heat-trapping gases. We're essentially wrapping a tighter and tighter blanket around the atmosphere. And sometimes, it's an optical illusion. If you look up in the sky looks infinite, right? That, it just looks endless. And I think people are often puzzled, how can humans really influence something that size? How could you fill the sky with CO2? It's ridiculous. The best way I heard it described is, imagine that the Earth were scaled down to the size of a beach ball, right? Now, the atmosphere, the global atmosphere, would be the thickness, if you coated the beach ball in a coat of varnish, right?
On it.
Yeah, just so you put a coat of varnish onto the beach ball. That thickness of that one layer of varnish would be the thickness of the global atmosphere. Okay. It's incredibly shallow. And remember, that's that thin layer, just maybe 20 kilometers over our head between us and outer space. And remember, in outer space, everything's dead, right? We're the only living thing for 1 trillion kilometers in any direction, possibly more. So that tiny little global atmosphere we've turned into a dump over a century and a bit. Okay.
And one of the things, I think you were talking to Matt about it the other day, was that, some of the kind of attempts to massage the information and maybe misinform, have people suggesting that, for example, we're actually in a cooling period at the moment on planet Earth, right? And I think, to paraphrase you can explain it better. The Earth changes temperature over millions and millions of years. It has cooling phases. It has hotter phases. But this is irrelevant, not germane to the idea that man-made heating is going on right now within that cooling phase. Would that be correct to say?
That's fair to say. If you go back 450 million years, which, by the way, in human terms is pointless, right? And the only people interested in 450 million years ago are paleoclimatologists. For example, Ireland was somewhere else. I think we were in the southern hemisphere 450 million years ago. So the point is, the global oceans were different. The chemistry of the atmosphere was different. The amount of solar energy being received by Earth 450 million years ago was different. So when people tried to say, oh, it was hotter then and we didn't all die, we weren't around. It was a different, it was physically, Mario, a different world. If you looked at a map of the Earth 450 million years ago, you'd have to blink to find Ireland, right? We were somewhere else. right?
Yeah,
when continental drift.
It was ultimately one big, huge globule of land.
Yeah, if you go back to Pangea, whatever number of hundreds of millions of years ago, and the splitting up of the continents and the flow of oceans and so on. So the point is, it was completely different. So paleoclimatologists, who are a fancy word for climate study of the deep past, right? They do reconstructions of climate models, and they will tell you that, whatever 400 million years ago, Earth was much hotter than it is now. We know, for example, during a period called the Carboniferous period, that we had giant insects. And the reason we had giant insects is there was so much
hot
oxygen.
Air. Oh.
Oxygen levels in the atmosphere were so high that it allowed the development of oversized insects. They tend to be limited by oxygen levels, right? So the point is this. It took somebody like Joe Rogan to take the little sort of detail that Earth is currently in a cooler phase than it was back then, right? And to take those two factoids, shove them together and say, gotcha, beanies, right? The problem is the only climatic conditions that matter to humans are the conditions that prevail when humans are around. So up to 12,000 years ago, there was no human civilization. There was no buildings. The only buildings we had were caves. Humans essentially were hunter-gatherers. So all our antecedents were hunter-gatherers. They lived from hand to mouth, and they moved around in small groups. There was no communities, no settled, there was no agriculture, right? Then we enter this climatic sort of freaky period called the Holocene. This is as we exit the last ice age. We came into this incredibly stable period, climatic period, where temperatures, the Earth began to warm out of the ice age, but more than warming, it's stabilized. So if you look at all these spiky maps over the last 100,000 years, temperature shooting up and dropping down and up and down, it's almost like the line flatlined for the last 10,000 years. We don't exactly know why. There are some, I think humans had an influence on it, by the way, even how we were beginning to shape the planet with, for example, forest clearing. It might be hard to imagine, but even like Neolithic humans who arrived in Ireland 6,000 years ago, they reshaped Ireland. So, once humans mastered fire, we were able to exert incredible influence on our environment, more than any other animal. And that has continued, obviously, with the access to fossil fuels and so on. Our ability to change and to shape the Earth has increased exponentially. What hasn't increased or hasn't kept up with it is our wisdom. Our ability to understand the limits of our power and the fact that there are certain boundaries beyond which you need not to go. And that, I think, has been, I guess, the tragedy of our age, is that our power has overwhelmed our ability to understand our power and to know that we have to work within planetary limits. And at the moment, by the way, there's this model called, it's a Copenhagen group who've developed these 9 critical planetary boundaries. And earlier this year, they declared that the 7th boundary had been breached. So 7 of the 9, which, if I were to translate that, Mario, if I were your doctor, right, I'd be telling you that your liver's gone, your kidney's gone, your lungs are gone, etc. You take my point. This is the equivalent of, on a planetary scale, these are the equivalent of a vital organ.
In global terms, right, environmental science and scientists in global terms, are we going to have to start relying a bit more on maybe our European contingent? Because the American contingent is kind of been fired, a lot of them.
Yeah, and some of them are going to move to Europe.
Some of them are going to be afraid as well.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the scientists that are there will be somewhat, cowed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think America is entering a long period of decline. I think that's pretty clear. You don't need to be a great student of American politics to recognize that decline has been in the offing for some time, but I think it has really burst into the open. And bear in mind that something as toxic as Trump couldn't happen by itself. It had to come out of a context of an already rotten system. Like a healthy political system could not be collapsed by one creature like that. The system was already rotting, and it was rotting through money. Money has marinated the American political system for decades. They've flooded money. For example, the Citizens United came in. This is a ridiculous Supreme Court ruling in 2010, I think it was, where they removed all limits on corporate funding of politicians. And that was the day that the Trump rot was really confirmed.
It's also the celebration of greed.
And ignorance. And it's a horrible, and greed.
But the celebration of greed and the protection of greed by the law of the land.
Yep.
The law which says you can be as greedy as you want.
Oh, yeah.
Are you saying I can own everything? If you can, you are allowed. And you can have as many lawyers as you want to defend you. In fact, we insist, that's one of the things, the founding fathers, as they call them, that would insist that you have these lawyers to protect you owning as much as you want. Yep. And that greed, of course, naturally leads to bullying. And bullying naturally, I'm bigger than you, so I just push you around. I want more. You get less. And that's...
Well, we know, for example, that the last Gilded era in America came to a crashing end in 1929 with the Wall Street crash. But the Gilded era was a dreadful period where the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and so on, they made their money off the back of child labor and running massive monopolies. And America was highly corrupt and highly unequal. And of course, what happened then, again, we're not doing a full history lesson on this, but what happened essentially was the collapse of 1929 led to the New Deal with FDR. And we led to really 40 to 50 years of an expansion of the American middle class when the plutocrats were sort of tamed. Marginal taxes in America in 1950 and 1960s were 90%. Right, so basically everything you earned over about $100,000 was taxed above 90%. And what that had the effect of doing was preventing the oligarchs from rising. The problem with...
Or giving them the incentive to.
Yeah. The problem with people accumulating a ton of money is it isn't the money. There's only so many yachts you can get. The greatest thing that they can parlay that cash into is influence. They can buy political influence. They can buy political institutions. And what we've seen now in America, of course, is the complete corporate capture. And of course, even worse than the corporate capture, we saw it the other day where the oligarchs, the technology oligarchs, were in to pay homage to the new king of America. So we have the...
I have to say that is one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. And it made me question an awful lot as well, right? So you had Tim Cook and Bill Gates basically lapdogging themselves in front of Trump, prostrating themselves in front of Trump. Tim Cook made a speech in which he thanked Trump 8 times in 2 minutes. But what it brought into my mind was this. The celebration of money, the celebration of greed, even more, the celebration of tech bros, the celebration of entrepreneurs, the celebration of these great minds. We revere them. We hold them up to be pharaohs. We hold them up to be gods, right? Bill Gates, these guys, Tim Cook, he's in another level. And what are they really? What are they really? They will walk into a room and behave like that. So that's what they are. That's where you see who they are. So they're not what we've been told. They are terrified cowards. They're just cowards.
The only thing they love, the only thing they care about is their money and their privilege. And Trump has basically said, you play ball, you kiss my ring, or your money and your privilege is on the line. And we saw that, for example, when early on he attacked the law firms. He went after some of the biggest law firms in America and effectively gelded them. And they came running to him, hands on knees. And these are the people supposed to, the majesty of the law, the thing that separates us from the beasts is the rule of law. And those law firms, they were more interested in their mansions in the Hamptons than they were in the rule of law in their own country. And to be honest, that spectacle that you've just described, Mario, I watched it as well. And it reminded me when Hitler in the mid-1930s used to have all the industrialists in to pay homage to him and to talk him up and to give him gifts and to give him cars and all manner of things and name factories after him and so on. It is as craven as that. But the difference is in the 1930s, we hadn't seen this before, right? But you could say to the Germans, well, okay, you didn't know what was going to happen. Now, what's our excuse this time? We are watching the rise again. But the difference this time is Germany, in the scheme of things, was a piddly little country compared to the power of the US. But to have a dictator surrounded by tech oligarchs who, by the way, have the ability to basically they're in all our pockets. I mean, in the literal sense, they're in our pockets and maybe we're in their pockets too.
People talk about, they didn't recognize it happening back in the 30s and it's sort of happening now and we may make allusions to the 1930s again. But it is happening now again, let's face it. And the reason it's happening now is because people refuse to want to compromise their cushy job. Whether you're a congressman or a senator or a tech person or even us, John, and I may say us, I just look around, it's all of us. It's only when a tipping point is reached that people will actually get out and say, no, I can't do this. That the tipping point will stop, that the tipping point will start. Do you know, because otherwise people will go, I'll be honest with you, I'd like to do something, but I have a wife and kids and a mortgage.
Sure. I mean, there's a phrase that says, people tend to be more concerned about the end of the month than the end of the world. Yeah. And there's truth in that because we're all busy, etc., etc. But sometimes that can also be cover for cowardice, especially for the rich and powerful who do have opportunities. And I find this...
Like they could all... John, like, when you watch those guys in the office, right? One thing that occurred to me, I've already told you one thing that occurred to me, but another thing that occurred to me was, if they really wanted it, they could all band together. They could band together. There's only a few of them.
Yeah,
they could band together
and hold the line against this guy.
Hold the line.
Yeah, but they don't want to. The point, Mario, is they're like him, right? Mark Zuckerberg, Bezos. These are guys with sunken eyes. They're mostly either borderline sociopaths, and certainly incels, I think is that other lovely phrase used. These are people with very little social connection. And I would say the same for Bill Gates in a different way. I know he's rinsed his reputation with his Bill Gates Foundation, but I mean, you go back 20 or 30 years ago and Bill Gates was considered to be another monstrous oligarch. The only difference is he was hurt enough by being hated that he actually went and spent some money to clean his reputation in the same way that the Rockefellers and the Carnegies did. They built libraries. They sponsored, cultural events. What are the current oligarchs doing? It's just burn it all to the ground.
Yeah, they don't even make a pretense.
They not even care.
Where's the Elon Musk Foundation?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And Musk, I think, was an eye-opener for a lot of people because we all bought into his, this genius guy rhetoric. But of course, when you look more closely into it, you realise that, Tesla, for example, he didn't invent Tesla.
He did not.
Bought his way in. SpaceX, he didn't invent SpaceX. He's not an engineer.
He didn't invent PayPal.
No, he's got nothing. He knows nothing about how to land a module.
No, but he's out as if he's a scientist.
Yeah, but he carries on like he's some kind of mixture of Edison with some of the Edison meets Einstein, right? This sort of entrepreneur genius. It's all smoke and mirrors, bull. And I think he exposed himself delightfully in that. And also, like his other oligarch friends, he exposed himself as a coward, a craven coward who will lay down before the biggest bully in the room.
We veered off a little bit.
We have a tiny bit.
Let's get back, because I wanted to ask you a question, right? Let's get back to 2017. Let's get back to brass tacks here. Let's get back to the old days, which have gone. The old days where we actually used to talk about climate in simple terms that people can understand. I'm going to draw a little pie chart, right? It's just a circle, okay? Try and split up the percentages for me, roughly, John. Mm-hmm. What's the problem on Earth? Carbon and methane. Is it a heat capture?
Yeah, in terms of global warming, yeah. Okay. Carbon is number one. And methane is number two. There are other trace gases as well.
And we say that's the main problem facing Earth. The heat capture is leading to all sorts of other problems.
Yeah. If I was to say what's the one lever that you'd pull to sort of, stabilize our global climate system, it would be we would cut CO2 input and we would reduce methane. The problem with CO2, of course, is it's a long-acting gas, and the CO2 already released, Mario, will continue to heat the atmosphere for hundreds of years into the future. On the other hand, methane, which is more pertinent to the Irish situation, it's an incredibly powerful gas.
But disappears.
84 times more powerful per molecule over a 20-year time frame than CO2, but it washes out of the atmosphere much more quickly.
Okay.
So if you put some methane up, it will wash out of the atmosphere in a reasonable time frame. Okay. So, for example, if you wanted to hit the emergency brake on global emissions, and you ask me what's the magic thing we do, cut methane emissions first. Right, because you can get a quick result. How would you do that? You would reduce the leakage of methane from fossil fuels, of course, but also the huge, massive global source of methane is ruminant agriculture. Right, in other words, livestock. The methane particularly from cattle and from sheep, but principally cattle, I suppose, especially in this part of the world. And they emit huge amounts of methane as part of their digestive process. They're called ruminants. That's what they do. It's not their fault. It's just a fact. And the issue really with them is that there's just so many of them. There are billions of these animals, and they're spewing out methane, and this really powerful gas is warming the atmosphere.
Okay, because
really,
we'll open
really
up, because you can open up X, right, and some dude, Illuminabot, will say, "Are you telling me cow farts and sheep farts are responsible for this?"
Well, the first thing I'd obviously tell them is that it's burps, not farts. It's actually part of the digestive process. Is they burp up methane from their multiple stomachs. Yeah. So
and farts?
Not so much.
Not so much farts.
Really, no.
That was even a little bit of a joke in itself.
That's just a joke. Yeah,
it's principally
it's the burping, and they burp constantly from the. It's part of the digestive process. The only way they can exit the methane is to burp it out. I've often had the idea, Mario, that we should fit little lighters to them, so we could flare off the methane.
Yeah.
And out in the countryside, you drive along the night, and it looked like there's a field full of dragons with these flames going out. But I mean it. If you were to light the breath of a dairy cow, it would be like lighting a fart.
It's a massive burp.
You'd get a big flame of methane coming out.
And so you have billions and billions of cows and billions of sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And is there any other livestock that's responsible for this? Do goats do it?
It's all ruminants. I'm not certain about goats, to be honest with you. But as for any animal, essentially that is ruminant. But cattle and sheep were the two main ones. But I better not put my foot in it and name an. For example, pigs don't. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're, and chickens don't as well. Okay. So if you wanted sort of lower emissions meat, and in my own case, for example, I'm not a vegetarian, but I limit my dairy products. For example, I don't drink milk. I've switched to oat milk completely. But also in terms of meat, chicken is a much lower methane source.
Methane emissions you would pick first.
I would, yeah.
And let's say you have 100 particles of emissions from a fossil fuel station.
Mm-hmm.
We call it coal.
Okay.
What kind of rough percentage are you talking about there, methane and CO2?
Well, okay, if you burn, for example, a kilogram of coal, a couple of things happen. Number one, that coal is converted principally into carbon dioxide. That is converted, so that it breaks down and it's released into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. You get a certain amount of soot and so on, but largely you're turning it so you're turning the carbon, Mario, that is locked into the coal. So the literal carbon of the coal
vapor
is turned, it oxidizes in the heat and turns into carbon dioxide. Yeah. And that floats off into the atmosphere. Now, here's a fact that melts my brain, and let me share it with you. Let's say you burn a litre of fuel or a kilogram of coal. And let's say you measure the heat that you get from burning it, right? So let's say we had a coal here and you measure the heat, X number of therms of heat that you get from it. Now, when you convert it to CO2, that will continue heating the atmosphere. But over its lifetime, by the time it's washed out of the atmosphere, it will have caused 100,000 times more heating than the initial pulse of heat released when you burn that coal. That's why it's so incredibly potent. So when we burn stuff, right, anything, wood, coal, peat, gas, we convert carbon into carbon dioxide. And bear in mind, carbon is a natural part of the carbon cycle. But when what we call fossil fuels, the reason we call them fossil fuels is they're from ancient carbon cycles from tens, hundreds of millions of years ago. So we're taking carbon that was buried in the deep earth hundreds of millions of years ago through natural processes that were weathered out of the atmosphere. And we dig them up and go, woohoo, let's set fire to them and see what happens. Yay. We have taken the carbon cycle, the global carbon cycle, and blown it to pieces. We've injected hundreds of millions of years of carbon from deep history into a few decades. And it is a catastrophic decision. And that's why I keep doing what I do, Mario, is because we need to keep talking about this. Yeah. Because I keep hearing people saying, oh, it's very expensive to change. I like the old diesel, right? And I'm not giving up my beefsteaks. Well, I'm saying you can accept modest losses and modest, shall we say, trade-offs, or we lose everything. And that's the dilemma that we face right now. We're on the cusp of losing everything. Yeah. Every crumb of the last 10,000 years of human development is on the line in the next 20 to 30 years. What we need to do here in Ireland and globally is really simple. One word for it: electrify everything, right? So, for example, where do we one of our big sources of carbon is transport, right? Transport involves, for example, in the US, the number one source of carbon emissions in the US is the transport sector, right? That's everything running diesel engines and petrol engines. So you electrify transport and you get a sharp reduction in CO2 emissions. So reducing transport by electrifying transport is a total no-brainer, right? Because we now have the electric vehicles. I was actually speaking to somebody this morning who was just pointing out that the range of electric trucks available in Ireland has now gone up to 500 kilometres. These are trucks, never mind cars. Vans, trucks, buses.
Had they been very low?
Oh yeah, they had been maybe 200 or 300 kilometres. They're now usable at that range. So we can electrify our entire transport system. And for people who think electric trams or electric transport is quaint or unusual, check out the Dart and the Lewis, right? These really large, fast-moving objects, or the TGV in France, like these, or the bullet trains in Japan. These are the fastest land-based vehicles in the world, and they're all electrically powered. So electricity is a fantastic power source. It's clean, it's quick, and it's lossless, and it doesn't require setting fire to stuff, right? So that's transport. Next up, housing. In Ireland, I think about 10% of our emissions are related to our housing stock. How do we cut our emissions? Insulation and so on, retrofitting, yes. But the quickest one, Mario, without a doubt, is to take your gas boiler or your oil boiler, throw it out and replace it with a heat pump, right? I've done this myself. And your heat pump means that you're no longer contributing carbon from your house. The best way I can describe it is that for every 1 unit of electrical energy that you put into a heat pump, you get 3 to 4 units of heat energy out. Now, the only other device I can name for you that is that efficient is a bicycle. Right, a bicycle can take human energy and multiply it by 3 or 4, right, without any additional mechanical input. Yeah. That's why the bicycle, up until the heat pump, was considered to be the most efficient invention in human history.
What about renewables and alternatives, right?
Yep.
Alternatives. So
on the energy production side,
on the energy production side. So let's talk about, for example, briefly again about wind, right? Yep. So I was talking to somebody recently, and they were saying wind is bollocks, right? Sorry, I know. Sorry, that sounds very basic, but and I went, well, explain, right? And they went, well, two things here. One is actually what Trump said is true, that wind only works when the wind is blowing.
Right.
Yeah. What this person said. Hang on.
Yep.
And then the next thing they said was, it's also a scam. Mm-hmm. And I went, why is it a scam? Well, because everybody's being paid tons of money in incentives to kind of do this wind business. So all this wind farms you see and wind turbines, it's because the only reason people are doing it is because they're being given hundreds of millions by state grants to do it. So answer those questions.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'll say is your friend doesn't know much about energy systems generally. I hate to break it to him, and I'm guessing it's a him. Okay. Let's break it down. First of all, of course, the wind doesn't always blow, and solar critics will point out that the sun doesn't always shine, especially at night. These are all true things. The point about renewable energy is that it's, first of all, once you've installed the infrastructure for it, so once you've created or built a wind turbine, right, essentially the energy to spin that turbine is provided free gratis and for nothing by the earth for the life of the turbine. If you build a power plant, you continue to shovel fossil fuels into that plant for the totality of its life. And by the way, to skip forward briefly on the subsidy thing, the fossil fuel industry receives subsidies annually running into trillions of dollars. So anybody who thinks that renewables are some big soft scam needs to get off that particular Facebook group, right? It's a nonsense. The biggest subsidy suckers in the world are the fossil fuel industry, just for clarity. Okay, so the point really about wind and solar is that they have increased in ability and in potency phenomenally, Mario, in the last number of years. For example, China has brought on board colossal, and I mean just mind-bending amounts of new solar energy, right? They deployed more solar energy in the first half of 2025 than the rest of the world combined, right? This is what happens when you have a technocratic society not run by maniacs. They might be unpleasant people, they might be dictators, but they're not maniacs, and they're not controlled by the fossil fuel industry. The thing about China is they're backing the technology that works the best. That's why the Chinese are killing it, I should say, in the world with electric vehicles, because they're not hog-tied by fossil fuel interests.
Okay, so I would have said, just back to wind again, right? I would have said, in my ignorance, I would have said Ireland is a great place for wind. We're an island. It is very windy. It's off the west coast, the west coast especially, I would have thought.
Oh no, it certainly is.
So it's great.
Yeah.
But if the wind stops blowing, sorry to be Trumpy about this, but if the wind stops blowing, can you store the energy?
Yeah.
Can you though? But that's not as easy as it sounds, is it?
No, it's not. The couple of things, right? First of all, we're in the process. We already have interconnectors to Northern Ireland, to the UK, and I think next year or 2027 we'll have our first direct interconnector to France, right? That means we can, as we overproduce wind energy on this island,
it's farmed out.
It gets pushed across to France, and so on. So we join effectively a European supergrid, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is there are different ways of storing excess wind energy. The great thing about wind energy is when you go offshore, first of all, the wind speeds offshore are much better than onshore because of lack of obstacles. Also, the turbines are bigger. So offshore wind blows most of the time, right? There are very rare anticyclonic periods offshore with massive turbines. And also, I'll give you this little test, right? We're at ground level today, Mario, right? Well, just about. Let's say that you and I finish this interview on the top of Liberty Hall, right? Out on the balcony, right? You'd be saying to me, Jesus, how does it get so windy? It's an ordinary day at ground level. There are what they call the prevailing winds just up there, right? And that's what wind turbines do. They go into the prevailing winds. So when you're at ground level, you're not experiencing the kind of wind energy that is up, a couple of 100 feet or a couple of 100 meters, right? And these wind turbines, by the way, are much taller than Liberty Hall, right? So these are huge things designed to harvest it. So number one, they're really good at harvesting energy. The second thing you can do with that is you can obviously store it in battery form. There are limits to that. But for example, what has been looked at as well is to use wind energy and all the cheap electricity, free electricity you get from it, to use a process called hydrolysis, where you essentially split water into hydrogen. You then pump that hydrogen into offshore storage, for example. The depleted, what do you call them? The gas fields off the coast of Cork, right? They're depleted, but they're empty fields. You can pump them with hydrogen, right? Now, what do you do with the hydrogen? Hydrogen is a useful, it's a tricky gas. You can't use it for central heating. You can't use it to run your car because it's too slippery and too tricky. But on an industrial scale, you can turn wind energy into electricity via hydrolysis into green hydrogen. Then when you need it, that green hydrogen is pumped back up to run a power station. And the output from it, by the way, what happens when you burn hydrogen? It turns back into water, right? So you get no greenhouse gases released in it. So hydrogen, mass green hydrogen, is one of the solutions. But the issue here is we have to focus on solutions. We don't have the luxury. For example, pumped hydro. We know about pumped hydro, where you use excess wind energy to pump water up a hill. We have one in Wicklow. Trying to think of the name of it, it'll come back to me. We're looking at building one in the silver mines as well in Tipperary. It won't be a mass solution in Ireland, but there are ways of storing energy from intermittent sources. We know, for example, that wind tends to blow stronger in the winter. We know that solar works better in the summer. So you combine those two, and you also connect and extend to a European grid. If you'd asked me 30 years ago, I'd have said, by the way, we should also add a nuclear power station, maybe down in Carnsford Point, but we didn't do that, right? We'd have had a lot of clean energy like the French, but we didn't do that. And quite frankly, it's too late now to go back down the nuclear route. It's too late. I mean, it would cost 20 or 30 years to get through the planning in Ireland to get it built. It would cost probably 20 billion. And knowing Ireland, it might cost more than 20 billion. And everybody would object to it. So I've given up speaking in favour of new nuclear. But what I speak instead is don't shut down the existing nuclear. The French, for example, 70% of their electricity, clean electricity, is produced by nuclear. And you know what the biggest threat to their nuclear power stations is? The rising water temperatures in the French rivers. Those nuclear power stations are almost all located on rivers. The reason they are is they need cold water, river water, for cooling. The rivers are getting so warm that they've had to shut down some of the power stations during the summer. And I'm sad to say, and sorry to say, over the next 10 to 15 years, I believe many of those nuclear power stations will go offline because the water is just too hot. Wow. Right? Which means, even for the French, they need to be pivoting away from nuclear power. Don't shut them down, but don't be wasting money on new ones.
Okay. One thing I heard you say recently, so I have two more things to ask you. And the book, John's book, of course, The Lie of the Land, a game plan for Ireland in the climate crisis. And this pertains to Ireland And it was that, obviously, there's a lot of kickback continually from the agricultural sector. But you pointed out that the agricultural community, the agricultural sector, isn't a monolith. It isn't a monolithic opinion. Will you explain that?
Sure. I think the voice of the agriculture sector in Ireland tends to be monolithic. It really does. It tends to come through, farm organisations who tend to do the speaking, and they do tend to speak with this monolithic voice. But the reality is it's not. It is obviously fractured. We have, for example, extremely prosperous dairy farmers on the one hand at the moment, many of whom are, I think the average dairy farmer income in 2025, and this is net income, over 100,000, well over 100,000 per annum, and for some farmers, way more than that, right? So some of them are really high on the hog. On the other hand, your average beef farmer in Ireland is getting his income is about a tenth of that. It's way below the minimum wage. And if you took away the subsidies from that, those beef farmers would be out of business. Now, many of them, of course, are doing it part-time. Many of them have off-farm employment as well. Sheep farmers are only surviving on subsidies. There is no money to be made in sheep farming. And in fact, I've made the point in the book that would be a good investment of taxpayers' money would be to buy out sheep farmers, particularly hill farmers, get them off the hills, and let's reforest and rewild our hills. And because the sheep on the hills are causing ecological wreckage, as are deer, as are goats.
But do you find any sympathy for your views within the agricultural community?
Limited. I mean, I would say I've had some people have approached me over the last while from groups, for example, like Talamh Beo, who are involved in what we call a more ecological forms of agriculture. So people in the horticultural community, for example, I'm often approached by tillage farmers, and they often make the point to me, Mario, that they're sick and tired of being blamed for high emissions and high pollution and rivers being poisoned. And they say, no, that's not us. You need to talk. It's the livestock guys, right? The same for the horticulture farmers. They're saying, we're super efficient at producing food, and you're always criticising Irish agriculture, saying it's food inefficient. I say, yeah, the livestock sector is, of course we should have a livestock sector. It should be a fraction of its current size, Mario. And I made the point again in the book that Holland, with 40% of our land mass, produces 7 times more food for human consumption than Ireland. So that is a disgraceful statistic, right? Why do they do it, or how do they do it? High technology, science-based, and they're not producing, they're not dedicating millions of hectares to just produce grass. We have this incredibly inefficient system where we cover the countryside in grass. We lash on the chemical nitrogen and the pesticides, and then we get animals to eat the grass, and then we eat the animal products. But what you need to do with food production is to cut out the middleman and eat the food directly yourself. So if you put down a hectare of potatoes or a hectare of turnips or whatever you like, the amount of food that will produce in market gardening terms is colossal. The same hectare covered in grass and converted into meat or dairy won't feed anybody, really. That's why with all this huge agricultural sector and this large exports, we're still food insecure on the island of Ireland. And that's something, to me, one of the strongest reasons that got me to do this particular project is to bang the drum that we are food insecure, and in a world of deepening climate change and climate breakdown, geopolitical uncertainty and destabilization, we need to be able to feed ourselves on this island. And today, Mario, we're importing about 85% of all the food that we eat. And I don't just mean bananas and coffee. I mean 75,000 tons of potatoes, for goodness sakes, imported. 1 million tons of fruit and vegetables imported. This is criminal. Yeah. We need to back our tillage and our horticulture sector and our organic sector.
The last question I just want to ask you was, because I haven't got to it yet in the book, is what was the Pat Kenny bit? Why does he not want you on the show?
I suppose myself and Pat, we came...
I rate Pat Kenny.
Oh, no. I mean, he's a fine broadcaster, one of the finest broadcasters we ever produced.
Correct.
Without a doubt. And unfortunately, he and I came to blows, so to speak. Not physically, but pretty close. Back a number of years back, when he was still with RTE. Where we kind of had we had an off-air argy-bargy that was very unpleasant, extremely unpleasant. Yeah, I had sent Pat I've detailed it all. I sent him, I'd been listening to his output on the radio, and I was concerned about the climate-sceptic kind of line that I was hearing from him. This is back 2008, 2009. And I sent him a list of questions, like 10 or 12 questions, just to sort of tease it out. Obviously, I annoyed him deeply with the questions, because I remember this morning I was at my desk and he rang me, and I wasn't expecting a call. It just came out of the blue, and John, it's Pat Kenny. Great. honoured. What can I say? And he laid into me for an hour.
For asking questions.
Well, no, how dare I, and who do you think you are, etc. So he was giving me the big man job, right? And a real whipping. And so this altercation, if I can call it that, went on for a solid hour. And the only reason, Mario, it ended at 2 minutes to 10 because he had to do his radio show at 10 o'clock. And I actually spoke to a colleague of his in RT recently who said that he was in the room because he was in the newsroom doing this. And he said we were all going, oh my God, it was literally murder on the dance floor, right? And so, yeah, I also went into studio with Pat a couple of weeks afterwards to continue the row, and it was very unpleasant. So, we're probably not going to be besties at this stage.
Has it, just because that's fascinating, but have his views changed at all since 2008?
I think so, yeah. I've been in studio with him
I would have
as recently as 23, I think. And, I think he's backed off the kind of hardcore climate denial stuff. And he's now much more about, well, I'll put it to you, John, there's no point in us doing anything in Ireland because look at China. Right, which, by the way, is a legitimate journalistic question, right? And that's where we left it, really. But he no longer is an advocate for outright climate denial, which I'm glad about. But I think that ship has not only sailed, that ship has sunk.
Fantastic. That was an interesting tidbit. John, thanks very much. Good luck with your book, The Lie of the Land. Did Matt give you a good speech?
Matt was fantastic.
Was he?
I have
Was he
to say,
good?
Now,
John now is a great person now.
Yeah, he was.
But Matt has been a great advocate for the...
No, he has. And I've had the regular weekly slot with Matt now for 4.5 years, for about 220 episodes.
Listen to it all the time.
And he puts me through my paces. He and so on. And it's never a love in, despite what some of the texters have to say. It never is. He's always rigorous. He always keeps me on my toes. But that's good because I like that too. But he's kept the door open in terms of promoting environmental issues, and I'm grateful for that. But more to the point, he was great at flogging the book. Brilliant.
Well, John, thanks very much.
Pleasure, Mario.
And my thanks to John Gibbons, most regular contributor to the Mario Rosenstock podcast, for telling me about his new book, The Lie of the Land, in all good bookstores now. And good luck to John with that, with his very important message. And of course, as we sort of said in the interview, it's kind of gone out of fashion a little bit almost, hasn't it, in the last while? But such an important issue, maybe the most important issue. My thanks to you, of course, the listener. If you can tell one other person about this podcast, please do. And my thanks to the great deluxebathrooms.ie. Their autumn super sale is now on, ends towards the end of September. 70% off. Get in there. Europe's biggest bathroom brands. The autumn super sale. I'll see you same time, same place next week, folks. Take it easy.